Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battishill, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battishill, your host and resident provocateur, and I have a really, really awesome guest for you today. Devin Galaudet. My first encounter with Devin was at an event where I was attending this event for the purpose of pitching myself as a potential guest on a number of podcasts. And Devin was one of the people pitching, and he told the most hilarious story in his pitch. And these pitches were only 2 minutes long. And I just thought, by the time I knew from the moment he started talking, I was like, oh my God, dude, you have to be on my show because you are too fascinating and too fabulous and too funny. And so here we are. I'm so delighted to have you, Devin. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I am grateful, Arlene. It's really good to see you, or almost. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Beautiful. We had such a good time at the event. And as each day passed in the event, you got to know people more and more, and they would speak again. And you get a real feel for who people are when you have a chance to spend a few days with them. So I was really excited, Devin, to just be able to spend an hour with you where it was just one-on-one, and we explore your story, which is... It's just the funniest thing. And, you know, obviously your story has many facets to it, but let me just tell everybody who's listening, Devin has written a memoir that's called 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes. And the book is actually a real book that's being published by a real traditional publisher. It's going into bookstores everywhere on September 18th, and I think you may want to get on Amazon if it is available there. You may want to get on Amazon and pre-order the book. I know there are a lot of pre-orders for the book already, as Devin's been interviewed on NBC and Fox TV. He's a contributor to the Huffington Post, among many other things. And it's just an extraordinary story behind the book. But the other thing that Devin does is he's the editor and publisher of the In the Know Traveler, which is an online magazine. It's a travel magazine. And he actually teaches people how to save a shit ton of money when they're traveling. And since I travel, I commute back and forth between Los Angeles and Toronto, and internationally, learning anything about saving money on travel is going to be well worth me listening to all of this. So once again, Devin, thank you for joining me. And my first question for you, let's just get started in the present. Tell me what you're doing in your life right now and where you're going.
I don't even know where to begin, if I'm honest, Arlene. I mean, my life is fantastic. Let me just start by saying that. I started, I think, just to go back to what when I was talking about 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes, is that I attempted to be a lot like him. And he was a con man, straight up. I mean, he used to sell oil wells that were not his. And sometimes I would wake up and there would be 25 sets of skis in the living room, and nobody skied. But he ended up with all kinds of bizarre things going on. And what he did, that while I tried to be like him and nailed it, but it's really not a sustainable lifestyle.
I think not.
Not for the long term. And sort of like when I regrouped and got my life together and all that kind of fun stuff. What he did is that he went after things that he wanted without apology. He just did it. He just went out and did it. Now, there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. Mm-hmm. And I like to believe that I took a lot of action in the right way. In other words, things that didn't I didn't have to steal from anybody. I just kind of went after the things, like, to be quite frank with you, I was told in the 3rd grade, you will never be a writer. Take a lot of woodshop classes. And Mrs. Jones, like, and to be quite honest with you, I listened to her for years and years. And there was just some sort of a moment when I was, there's a lot of moments, but I was in the film industry. And I thought I was telling, the hope is that I was going to work on The Wizard of Oz and Schindler's List and tell stories that mattered. And it turns out I need to tell my stories that mattered. And
right.
So regardless of how I felt about my own writing and what Miss Jones told me and all those kinds of things. And by the way, I took 1 million woodshop classes, and I can fix everything in your house. And that's one of the reasons why my wife married me, is that I'll fix it for her. But all this said, I needed to write anyway. Mm-hmm. It was sort of like one of those lessons I learned from my father. My father did a whole lot of things that he was really good at because he tried and did it. He just went out and did it. And so I thought, I'm going to write anyway. And I got, obviously, as you mentioned, I got into travel writing and travel journalism and travel editing. None of those things did I have a degree in when I started. I'm going to do this. Mm-hmm. And if I fall on my face, which I did more than once, it all sort of turned out okay. And I mean, to be quite honest with you, when you were talking about, like, yes, a traditional publisher, this is not something I'm doing on my own. I had to reach out to people. I had to send in my writing with Mrs. Jones talking in the back of my head saying, what are you doing? Where's your saw? Go saw something. Mm-hmm. And I sent it out anyway, and, got a yes. And I have a book publishers that is behind my story, probably in part because it's just absurd. There's a certain measure of absurdity that's going on in my story. And I wouldn't have it any other way, but at some point you have to put those stories in a way that is presentable. So readers can look at it and go, okay, I can identify with, or I'm finding amusement in this, or I'm entertained by it, or boy, this sounds a lot like my own family history. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we do the best that we can. So, and where am I going? I haven't a clue. I haven't a clue where I'm going. I don't know what any of this looks like or how it turns out. And to be quite honest with you, this may make no sense, and I may sound like a nut for saying it. I kind of have sworn to myself to explore the nature and power of my being. Mm. And if I fail 1,000 times, like, great. Right. So I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep doing the things that I love and that I don't know that I love. So,
well, it sounds like that's entirely consistent with the entire trajectory of your life, starting from the beginning of having a father who behaved a certain way. And, the con man part is funny, but there was something that he was doing, and he was going after whatever it was that he wanted. And those qualities are, characteristic of every entrepreneur. And it sounds like you have gone through life going after the things that you wanted. And even though Mrs. Jones was, sitting on your shoulder, whispering or yelling into your ear throughout your whole life, the reality was you knew enough and felt enough sense of yourself that you were going to go forward doing these things anyways. But it wasn't, am I correct in assuming that it wasn't as though there was any specific thing that you were attempting to do, or on a mission like, oh, I'm going to do all this work and I'm going to become a lawyer, or, oh, I'm going to do all this education, I'm going to become a doctor, where there was this, path that was very clearly defined? It sounds like your path has been one of delightful discovery, and you would just pursue that path, and that's where you went, and it always seemed to turn out okay.
Yeah, I think delightful discovery is about as charming and a whimsical way of describing it as possible. Sometimes it was nutty. It was nutty. I mean, again, failure is failure. You know what I mean? Like, I think going after the things that you want is sometimes really frightening, especially when you don't necessarily get permission from the world to do it.
Right.
But there was a part of me that's like, I had to go after it anyway. I was not there. Like, I have friends that went to school for a particular thing and then did that thing for 40 years.
Right.
Like, that's what they did. I could not work in a cubicle. I couldn't wake up and show up at a place at 9 o'clock every day. I'm not built like that.
Right.
And to be quite honest with you, like, I loved my father. He was nutty as a fruitcake, but he wasn't that either. Like, I think it's in the genes. I think if he was given opportunities, he probably would have been dangerous.
Right.
And, I think it was part of the bloodstream that you just kind of go out and you do these things and you see what happens, and you end up with a whole lot of fun stories is what you get from all of that failure. If you can have a sense of humor about the things that don't go your way, life is kind of entertaining and amusing. I mean, I can look back at some of these stories that I think, you were in a room when I was telling some things that really were, for me, kind of heartbreaking. And I tend to have an ability to look at it and sort of like, okay, well, let's go with the dark humor on this, because I think people identify with it, and people identify with like, okay, we've had some failures and we're marching. We're marching, into the bowels of hell.
And how do you account for that you had that perspective?
I don't think there was a choice, if I'm honest with you. I would love to say that I was some sort of a mystic philosopher. Actually, I kind of am. But I think that you can either allow life and the things that happen to you to kind of crush you and grind you down over time. And I see that happen. I see people sort of give up, and it's like, okay, I'm just going to keep going and doing my 9-to-5 job, but I really want to do these other things. And that seems to be far more painful than just, wow, that sort of sucked. All right, let's try it again. Let's go best 2 out of 3. Like, I got a traditional publisher, but I don't want to give anybody the illusion that I sent out my manuscript one time.
Right. It never works that way.
No, I sent it out a lot, and I had to rewrite sort of query letters and marketing plans, and I had to kind of have my P's and Q's in order. So whoever would take a chance on me, and to be clear, my name is not Stephen King or Nora Roberts or sort of like household names in literature. I'm like, who is that guy? Should we call it Mrs. Jones before we say yes to this clown? And so I had to throw it against the wall. I mean, that thing, I don't know if you've ever made pasta, but there's like one way to tell if it's ready is if you throw it against the wall, and if it sticks, then you drain it,
No kidding.
You slather it with sauce. But before you throw that one against the wall, there's going to be others that, like you're eating some stalk of wood from your lawn or something. So that's what I ended up doing. I just kept, what else is there to do?
Right. And let me ask you about Mrs. Jones, because I'm sure everybody listening can recall a teacher in their life that had a really devastating effect on them because of saying just one thing. And the way that you carry the weight of that throughout your life and how it surfaces throughout your life, did you ever find that the impact of what she said to you about that you were never going to be a writer, did you feel that found its way into other parts of your life where you were questioning yourself? Or let me ask you this, when she said that to you, did you take to heart what she said and actually take in the feeling of, oh, well, I mean, this is the adult, she's the authority, therefore she must know what she's talking about, and therefore I can't be this thing that I would like to be? Is that how you took in that information from her? Or did you say, well, go fuck yourself, you don't know anything? even in the third grade.
No, I wish I had done that in the third grade. I probably would have saved myself years of aggravation. No, I completely and totally internalized it. I took every single woodshop class that I could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my father was also a believer that you're going to have to fix things yourself and you probably can't afford them. Mm-hmm. So he taught me. He was like, okay, get up. You know, he'd wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, say, okay, we're painting a house, move. Mm-hmm. And we go paint a house at 4 o'clock in the morning. Hey, we have to frame out something. Come on, we're demoing a bathroom, you know, and we'd go in there with sledgehammers. And I was like a little kid, mm-hmm. you know, and that's what I did. I assumed that I would be doing construction. And I spent a fair amount of time doing things like retail jobs and stuff like that. And there was a fuck you moment. Mm-hmm. There was sort of like, and I wish I could like really pinpoint exactly when it was, but I think it was like kind of in my early 20s mm-hmm. where I was doing construction. I remember working for a stockbroker. And the stockbroker got raided by the SEC for stock fraud. I mean, this was totally a dubious company. And there was a point where it was like, I'm looking around me and it was like, none of this crap mattered. What am I worried about? Now, that said, it's not like all of a sudden the light went on and it just stayed on forever. Mm-hmm. It would go on and then I would go do something and have some weird result or some weird experience or some fantastic result. And then when there was a next level, maybe the light went off for a little bit. Now mm-hmm. there was that self-doubt that would creep in, the voices of the Mrs. Joneses of the world who said, no, you can't do that. And I mean, funnily enough, is that even a word, funnily?
I wonder about that oftentimes because I hear people saying that, but you know what? We're going to go with it for today.
We're running with it today.
Funnily enough.
Funnily enough, and I lost my train of thought.
Let's just play with funnily.
Yeah. So funnily enough, I don't know if somebody like Mrs. Jones was just projecting her own nonsense on me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. And the truth of the matter is when I go out into the world and people have their issues and their nonsense, that's probably, if there's one thing that I've learned in the world, is that most of what goes on that I don't like has absolutely nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. It's somebody else's nonsense. It's somebody else's Mrs. Jones talking in their head. Because I know Miss Jones didn't invent, you can't do that.
Yeah, no kidding.
She just took it and ran with it and ran into a third grade class in 1972 mm-hmm. and slathered people with it because that's what a lot of people did and do. And, you know, I think at my core, I think I have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit mm-hmm. Where you just go after this stuff. You try it out and you see what happens, mm-hmm. And you win some and you lose some. And I think I'm way more happy being sort of like a freelance mm-hmm. lifestyle kind of person.
Right. And I think that, starting as early as, like you say, in the third grade and going throughout life, that we encounter a lot of people who are in positions of authority over us, which effectively means they're in positions of judgment over us. And with one fell swoop, they size us up and say, this is who you are, or this is what you're going to amount to, or you're not capable of this. It's always quite negative. It's very rare to encounter people throughout your life. You find them in mentors and coaches. But even with coaches, especially in athletics, the coaches are just grinding on the kids and trying to force them to, man up and all that kind of shit, instead of really cultivating a relationship with that kid that is empowering, that leaves them feeling like they can do anything. And what I think is so interesting is that for anyone who, shall we say, falls outside of the mainstream in terms of their behavior, their dress, their way of speaking, what it is that they choose to do in life, they always receive the harshest judgment from all of the people around them. Like everybody is just supposed to fit into a box, because then we can be much more comfortable about what that is, because then we don't have to think about anything. And it's so interesting to, what has happened with you throughout your life with the voice of Mrs. Jones being there, and that judgment and that the diminishing effect of what she said. it's so devastating to go through an entire lifetime of, being that racehorse in the gate, waiting for the gate to open, and having somebody hanging onto your tail, which is the effect of Mrs. Jones. It's just like, why can't I run free out in the world without somebody holding onto my tail in the gate? You know what I mean?
No, I totally know what you mean. I think by the time I was 12 years old, well, I mean, I know this for an absolute fact, and this is not a secret of any kind, by the time I was 12 years old, I wanted out. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know what that meant. What that meant was I just didn't want to be here. And I didn't care where here was. I didn't want to be in the gate because somebody was going to be holding on to the tail, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my first thing was I found my family's Valium. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a normal thing. I mean, maybe it is for nut burgers like me, but I think it's not a normal reaction. Mm-hmm. It's not a normal reaction to want to check out in, the early part of your life. And because of those fears and that anxiety that came along with, okay, we're going into the starting blocks. I'm like, no, I'm going to run screaming into the wilderness. I don't want that. So it didn't matter for a certain period, certainly in my young adult life, I was like, no, I'm just checking out of this thing. What is the minimum I can do? And I'll just do that.
Right. That makes perfect sense. It's just so extraordinary what happens to all of us in response to the things that we encounter and the choices that we make about what our next move is, because that's ultimately in life what this is all about. It is, what is your next move at each stage with everyone that we encounter, with every situation we experience. And I'm curious about, the point at which you really started writing in earnest, even though you'd received these messages, very early on that were very limiting and defining for you. What was the moment where you made that decision where you were looking at yourself as a real writer?
I think that was a really gradual process, but I remember taking this was on a total lark. I took a writing course at a local community college. And at the time, there was a little bookstore near that community college where I had a minor crush on the girl who owned the bookstore. And so I went in there one day and said, "Oh, I'm taking a writing class at the school." And she goes, "Oh, who's the teacher?" And I said, I don't remember who I said. And she goes, "Oh, no, go back and take it from this other guy, a guy by the name of Jim Crusoe." She goes, "Just do it. He'll change your life." And I didn't really give that much credence, but I liked the girl. Mm-hmm. So I went back and changed the class for this Jim Crusoe character. And I went to this guy's class. And he was primarily a fiction writer and a super smart guy with bushy eyebrows and knew something about every single writer that anybody would ever bring up. Mm. And he was an impressive guy. And he gave us a little writing assignment, and I turned in the little writing assignment, and it comes back. And it was quite literally red pen everywhere. And it was I quite literally, he allowed hi there. And then all the stuff was, X'd out. And then in the middle of the page, it was Susie said, and then all this stuff was X'd out. And it's Joe walked into the room, and then all this stuff was X'd out. And at the very bottom, he said, "Great job. I'm looking to see how you're going to explore this further." I mean, there was nothing left of this 4-page page. So this is Miss Jones all over again. And so I tried really hard and tried to be more fascinating and more interesting. And I kept trying to write and write and write and write because I wasn't going to let it go. And so I turned it in next week, same thing. And now instead of the lines through the words, it was just a red X at the top of the page. This whole page is junk. And around week 5, and I kept trying to impress this guy with my genius and my prose, and every week the same thing would happen, and he'd always leave a comment at the bottom of the page. "Great work." And I'm like, "Are you out of your mind? How dare you? Now you're insulting my intelligence." And I was doing an assignment, and it was 2:00 in the morning, and I was frustrated and annoyed, and I thought, what if I just stick a pencil in this guy's eye in the story, because then I'll feel good about it. So I put the teacher in the story, and I stuck a pen in his eye, and I just went crazy on this page. I turned it in. I didn't think anything about it. And the following week, he walked up to me, like he was handing it back, and he walked me off to the side. He goes, "I knew you were going to get it."
Yeah.
And it was like, it took me a long time to figure it out, but I had to turn off the filter of what it was I thought I was supposed to write as a writer and just write.
That is exactly what I was thinking was happening as you were describing this, that you were, and I hate to use this word, but it really is applicable, is that you were not actually writing from your authentic self. You were writing what you thought and writing it in a way you thought, instead of just expressing yourself and letting the words flow. And it sounds like when you were sticking the pencil in the guy and you actually introduced the real emotion in the story, that was the discovery. Fair to say?
No, that's absolutely fair it's absolutely fair to say. I think you nailed it. It wasn't that I was thinking per se. It was that I was thinking, this is what a writer would write.
Right.
Which is like, what is that? And then around the same time, I had a dear friend who's a writing teacher. And I asked her, like, well, what does this mean? What do I do to be a writer? And she goes, well, what do you think you would need to write to call yourself a writer? Because around that time, I actually started writing travel articles and doing some other things. This was a long time ago. And I remember somebody would say, oh, are you a travel journalist? No, I'm a travel writer. And if they said I was a travel writer, I would say, oh, no, I'm a hobbyist. And if somebody said, oh, you're a hobbyist? No, I dabble. And so whatever you thought I was, I wanted to minimize it to make sure that you thought whatever it was that I wasn't quite that thing. I mean, this was just the manifestation of, I want out. I don't want to have to think of myself in these ways. And it was a little exploration at a time where all of a sudden I could put my work aside and go back and read it and go, you know what? It's pretty good. Go back and go, I can edit it and spruce it up and make it a little bit better. And then when I would turn in articles that would get published, I would end up going to, seeing the changes the editor made to make it better. And on top of all of that is that I loved reading. I loved reading. So I read so much good writing that, I could start seeing where bad writing was showing up.
Right.
But I think this is true with everything, is that you have these aspirations of goals of like, wow, I want to be the next Emily Dickinson or the next Mark Twain. Right. And I have good taste. But, manifesting it in terms of the writing is a process. Right. I think this is manifesting, hitting a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Right. It's just going to take time and practice. Some people are going to be inherently better at it. Some people are just going to be inherently better at whatever it is that they do.
Right.
That doesn't mean you can't be great. That just means that you're going to have to put in the hours. You're going to have to put in the time, and you're going to have to look at your work with a lot of red lines through it.
Right. And the thing too is that the thing that can leave you so vulnerable as a writer, I would imagine, is that you don't become the next Emily Dickinson. You may approximate her success, but everyone writes differently. They write with and through a different voice. They have a different style. And there's no way to measure any of that against anything else to know where does it rank on the scale of good writing. And did you find that for yourself during this process of you coming to discover who you truly were as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I learned that lesson not so much through my own writing, but reading other people's work. In other words, I remember I started a writers group because I wasn't going to finish my book on my own. I needed to be, accountable to somebody. And I had a buddy come in who was like, I'm trying to be like Cormac McCarthy. And so he starts reading this work and was like, wow, that is not bad Cormac McCarthy, but that's like terrible you.
Yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, it was well-intentioned stuff,
Right.
He was a talented, smart guy, and writing like Cormac McCarthy is fine if you're Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah,
if that's not
exactly.
you. So I needed, there's a part of me that's like, oh yeah, no, part of my writing is sticking a pencil in somebody's face.
Yeah.
That's part of what it is.
And there, that is actually, because I've seen you in person presenting yourself, that is actually how you communicate out in the world, in a way that, yes, while you're sticking, the pencil in somebody's face or the pencil in someone's eye, you're doing it with such joy and love and humor that no one can ever take offense at what you're doing, because they're just laughing too hard. And, I think that, in the way that you describe the story of you and your father, I mean, would you be kind enough to share with our audience the pitch that you did at the New Media Summit, that 2-minute pitch? Because, I mean, it really encapsulated everything in 2 minutes. Do you even remember it?
No, I made it up on the spot. I mean, if I'm honest with you, I wish I could say, oh yeah, no, I know what I said. I have no idea what I said. What could I have said? I said that, oh, wow, I was not expecting that particular question. What did I say? I said that he was, that my father's 7th wife had called me to tell me that he wanted to return home to Cadiz, Spain. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't Spanish. And he wasn't religious, and he wanted Ave Maria to be sung. And I knew that he was this sort of ridiculous con man person. And here's this poor woman who's like, oh, I want you to fulfill his dying wish, which is like, almost like, are you out of your mind? But you can't say that. So I took him, I did take him to Spain. And
wait, was this before or after he died?
Oh yeah, no. He was gone.
Oh, he was dead already. Okay, so
he was already dead.
You're taking his ashes to Spain.
I'm taking my dead father's ashes to Spain. And it was sort of like for me, to some degree, like a final hurrah, buddy picture kind of moment that we had together. And, there was so much had been sort of like he didn't change. He ended up living, when he died, he was living in a trailer in St. George, Utah. And I got to be honest with you, it was like cinder block steps. And listen, everybody's on their own path, and I have no moral judgment, but it was like, is that what I wanted for my father? Mm-hmm. No, of course not. I mean, this was not, I want him in a palace and, eating steak slathered in butter and, surrounded by strippers or whatever it is that I think that he was supposed to want to have as my father. That's how he's supposed to go out.
Right. So
he has this sort of like sad thing. And so, I kept thinking, as Spain is this wonderful destination for him, because I don't believe for a second that he had ever been there. Mm-hmm. There's no evidence that he was ever there. Mm-hmm. And so once I got him there, I gave him the road show that I could possibly give him. And then on the day of the scattering, I lost the ashes. What idiot does that?
No, wait a minute. Let me ask you something. Were the ashes in an urn?
They weren't. They were in this special hermetically sealed thing. Because, like, if you're taking the ashes, you just can't take, like, here's the thing. You need, like, document. Yeah, you just can't bring here's my father in a hefty bag. You have transportation documents, and the drum was like a hermetically sealed, official looking thing with a rubber stamp from some government official somewhere. So it had those kinds of things. And no, I wish it was sort of like a little fancy urn, but that was my father. So he got a black plastic jug. So,
because I picture you traveling all over the world with his ashes and you taking selfies all the way along the journey.
If I had any brains, I would have done that.
I mean, just the story in that alone.
But I did. I took him to bullfights, and I took him to the top of these where we were in Carmona, Spain, and I took him to the top of this Byzantine tower that was like 2,000 years old. I mean, it was pretty remarkable. I dragged him around and I yelled at him and I told him to go kill himself, but he was dead. I did all the things that you would do when you were fighting with somebody that you love who jerked you around. Mm-hmm. You know.
My God. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's like it's sort of ironic that, you know, we were close when I was young, and then something happened, and it really had nothing to do with me. This was one of those things. Was like, what is he doing? He's a crazy person, right. And I think he was just who he was. Again, if he had more opportunities, he would have been dangerous, but he just turned out to be kind of a jerk. In many ways. And I love him dearly. Like, I mean, like none of that's changed. I mean, it just means that I think when you give your love and your heart to anybody, you become vulnerable. They can do stuff to your heart that, you know, is like, wow, that sucks. And this is what we get from our parents. Yeah, we get sort of like, we get this, oh, I want to be like that guy. And then you get older and you're like, I don't want to be like that guy, but I am that guy. This is terrible. What do I do to fix it?
How do I not be that guy anymore?
How do I be not this guy? This is a terrible idea. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you're like in your late 20s being like, I can't stop being this guy. I have to come up with some plan B immediately. You know? And then, of course, at some point, I think as you get older, you start having a better sensibility that, you know, Dad was who he was. He did the best that he could.
It's really amazing as you get older. And for some people, this never happens. But as you get older and you start to recognize your parents for who they are as people and separate yourself out from you as a child in relation to them, you actually can see their foibles and their failings and have some compassion for them and forgive them. Because when you consider how old they were when you were born, and you think about who those people are today at that age, you think there's no fucking way these people were capable of raising children. They're just not equipped to do it. And yet those were our parents. But you never have that perspective because of that deep emotional connection to them, whether you want it or not, whether it was good or not. There is always that way that we relate to our parents as children.
I think it's a wonderful idea to have compassion for the people you love, but I'm not going to do it. I just want to run on around on these podcasts and say, what an idiot he was in front of as many people as possible. Of course, I'm being facetious. He was a great guy. Again, I think if he was given more opportunities, education, I mean, he was one of 13 children and 3 sets of twins in 5 years.
Wow. That poor mother.
Grandma was a baby making machine.
She was.
She was an amazing. Holy cow is right. And she was like a tough old bird and charming and funny. And, you know, I'm blessed.
It runs in the family, clearly.
Well, thank you.
Now, Devin, I want to just talk, before we shift gears over into more of the writing and the travel side of this, and the book itself, on the journey that you were taking with his ashes, and I'm sure it was infused with a lot of humor, but was there anything as you went on this journey that you discovered you were trying to resolve about your relationship with your father? And if so, did you come to that place of feeling that resolution?
I think that the resolution has much more to do with not coming to terms of the facts of the things that upset me, but more that I'm accepting this is just what happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think like, you know, I think when I left with his ashes, the hope is that I would get some sort of a mystical burning bush with an apology.
Yeah.
Oh, I did this thing that you felt you were wronged by. and I want to apologize. And then you get to a point where it's like, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's really, do you know what I mean? Like, in other words, me waiting for this thing that isn't going to happen is wasting my time. And not only is it wasting my time, it's wasting my energy on the relationship that I have with him.
Right.
You know, again, yeah, was he foibled? Are we surrounded by flawed human beings everywhere we look?
Yeah, of course.
How much time do I want to give in the course of my day to the person who cut me off? I think go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask in terms of, you know, the things that happened with him, if you feel comfortable enough sharing those things, does it trace back to just the fact that he was a con man and how he was representing himself to you? Or were there other things that happened with him and you just referenced that he cut you off? What was the dynamic between you and your father?
It was great. If I'm honest with you, it was great. It was really sort of like when I was young, he was not as reliable as I would have liked. But he was also sort of like, you know, my mother was not a demonstratively lovey, huggy, touchy, give you big hugs when things are sad kind of person. My father was.
Right.
He was that guy. So, and by the way, the fact that he was like a con man, the fact that he was this sort of like bizarre kind of character was like, that made me love him more. That's why. That's why I wanted to be like him. That's why I went after that kind of a lifestyle, because it was fascinating. You know what I mean? What do you mean? Your father's a doctor? Who cares? My father's a thief. So, you know, I think the issues that I had with him is that he just simply disappeared. He simply disappeared. And I think when he got older, and, you know, that kind of lifestyle is not for the faint of heart.
Well, Devin, let me ask you just to clarify something. When you say he disappeared, do you mean that literally or figuratively?
I mean that I think in both ways. In other words, there was a point where, and I certainly write about this in my book, is that Dad left. He and my mother were together for, you know, quite a number of years. And I mean, they had a very volatile, that would probably be a charming way to put it, relationship. And at some point they divorced, and he went his own way. And when that happened, he became completely scarce. Like, I quite literally would say, hey, what's your phone number? I'll give you a call. And he would say things like, your old man, he's like the wind. Like, are you out of your freaking mind?
Yeah. And how old were you at that time?
I was 20.
So it's still in your formative years where you're still trying to come into who you are as a person and as a man. And then he literally blows away with the wind.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of a sudden he moved to Vegas, and, you know, I think that was certainly the beginning of the end. Vegas isn't a place where you get your act together.
Quite the contrary.
Right. I don't know if that's a place to live. He brought himself a Chrysler Maserati, and he bought himself like a 22-foot long chocolate brown Lincoln Continental with velour seats. I don't know what the hell was going on with him. He did what he needed to do.
Clearly.
That's what he moved to Vegas. And it's like, you know, so what are you going to do?
Yeah. And so how old are you at the point that you begin writing this book?
I wrote it. Actually, what I ended up doing, I took that writing class and I ended up doing well in it. And my writing, I think, improved because I started really getting conscious about just allowing myself to be a conduit more than anything else. And then I ended up getting a BA, which I was like a terrible student in high school because how many tests can you take while you're, eating a sack of Valium, and do well, excel in that. So, I went back to school as sort of like an elder statesman, and I got a BA, and I think I wrote my first story about Dad in one of those writing classes there, and then I ended up getting an MFA shortly thereafter. In part because I was inspired by Jim Crusoe, and I was inspired by, honestly, great writers. And there was this little inkling, even though I probably denied at the time, that I was like, I could be a pretty good writer, but I have to put myself in an environment where I'm going to be willing to write all the time.
And was this the moment in time where things really did shift for you, where you decided, this is what I'm going to be doing? I am going to be a writer. That is how I'm going to make my living. You may not have known how you were going to do it in terms of, what you would be writing, but that you knew this is my real passion. It's my vocation. It's my avocation. This is what my life is going to be.
Yeah, I didn't think of it in terms of a job.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it in terms of a job. What I did was I thought it in terms of, I have to tell stories.
Right.
That's what I thought it. And that was the thing. I didn't even worry about the money element. I'm a big believer. I'm definitely not a law of attraction person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely more of a sort of like a Kabbalist, for lack of a better description.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I believe in, it was that this needed to happen, and it's really sort of my obligation I have to finish the stories. I have to write them down. I have to submit them. I have to make it sort of to some degree, a business. And there were times, especially in this particular book, where it was like, wow, I don't know if I want a bunch of rejections.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because this is who I am. You're rejecting me, but that's not actually true at all. Really,
But it is a dead setup for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is totally a dead setup, but I think there's just an element, like I remember hearing from agents. From a matter of fact, a big fancy agent in a high rise in Beverly Hills, who's like part of like a big syndicate kind of thing. And she wrote me and said, I love your book. I think your book is fantastic. I wouldn't change a thing with your book. I love the dialogue. I love all this stuff. And I won't represent you.
Wow.
And I read that, and I get it, because I'm not, if I was David Hasselhoff or something like that, I wouldn't have to worry about this. Go, oh, aren't you the guy from Knight Rider? Sure, we'll sign you.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's like, who am I? I'm just I'm the product of Mrs. Jones.
Right.
And so, it was one of those things that I wish she had written. Wow, you wrote a terrible book and you suck eggs. Go to the wood shop. I could have then said, go kill yourself in my head. Yeah. And instead it was like, what I needed to do was lick my wounds a little bit and just embrace the fact that I'm where I'm at in terms of my sort of like outward universe.
Right.
And go and keep, doing the fight. Right. Because part of being a writer is sitting and writing. And part of writing is sitting and editing and making it the best it can be. And part of writing, which, we all imagine is just sitting in a small dark room by yourself, is also, having conversations with you. Right. It's about, about self-promotion. It's about believing in what you've done strongly enough to override the doubt that will absolutely creep in. Because very, very seldom does somebody send out a single query letter to a single agent who sends it to a single publisher, and everybody gets six-figure advances. Yeah. That's not how it works.
For sure. Now, I wanted to ask about the writing itself, that once you settled into that this is what you were going to be doing and you wanted to tell the stories, you then move into this world of travel writing, and you're the editor and publisher of the In the Know Traveler, which is an online magazine. And was that a really good outlet for you for storytelling, or was it a different type of writing that just seemed to be where you ended up?
It's tied together in a loose knot. If that's one way to describe it. In other words, the travel writing and the web stuff, like I'm not a web guy, but now I'm a web guy. And I've had inthenowtraveler.com for almost 14 years. So a really long time on the internet. I started this a long time. And what I allowed myself to do was to call myself editor-in-chief, even though I was pretty sure I wouldn't measure up to the other editors-in-chiefs. And But at some point any judgment that would come from that is really not my business. My business is to go out and publish the thing that I believe I should be publishing.
Right.
I told a lot of first person stories, in other words, coming from me. I did this, these are my experiences. So that became In the Know Traveler. And we now cover 189 countries around the world. We've been around for 14 years. Wow. And it afforded me to write the kinds of stories that I wanted to be talking about. And the secret mission behind this was sort of like on the heels of 9/11 to some degree. And I think it was sort of like the sensibility is that it's us against the world. And I understand at the time that was what we needed to do. And I was also thinking, if we knew more about other countries and we went out and traveled to those places, it would be sort of like if they decided, well, we're going to bomb Texas. Well, I have friends in Texas. Go kill yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want to defend Texas. And because I personally backpacked quite a bit internationally, I knew that all these people that we might be disagreeing with are going to be a lot more like us than not. And so it really became sort of like my covert operation to say, I went to this place. I had a great time. There were no boogeymen. There was no terrible thing. The food was really good. The roads were really terrible.
Yeah.
And, this was especially true of places like Mexico where you get like bad news. And
that's just what I was thinking.
It's the worst, most dangerous place in the world. And that's like so not true. Like I've been to Mexico like 40 times.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, if I was selling cocaine at 3:00 in the morning, like and had $50,000 in cash in my pocket
and a gun,
my guess is it won't go well. That would
it rarely does.
Right. That would be my assessment, but that would be true in the United States in downtown Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So it was my thing that, yes, there are terrible people, there's terrible stuff going on, and it's not just this one location or another location. It's where it is, because the vast majority of the people you're going to meet anywhere in the world is really going to be, these are going to be the people who are going to help you out and walk you to the nearest restaurant and tell you, this is how you use the laundry in Poland.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's really amazing that with travel, the act of traveling erases all of the boundaries in the world, because you cross into different places and the topography and the geography is different and the language is different. And yet everybody still eats and drinks. And, when somebody needs help on the side of the road, somebody pulls up and, is there to help. And when it just becomes that one-on-one interaction that we have with one another, that's what makes the world a much better place. But you get, gatherings and gatherings of people who are congregating in a place, and it becomes very threatening because they feel, emboldened by the size and the perceived power that they have. And all of a sudden it's us against them. But I really believe in what you're doing, where you are really bringing the world to people and sharing your experience of that world. It makes it a lot safer and more exciting to venture out and go out into that world where you really can truly erase those boundaries.
Oh, I mean, that's precisely why I'm doing what it is that I'm doing, is that, my mother, when she'd say, hey, where are you going? And I would say, oh, I'm going to Turkey. Turkey? Why would you go to Turkey? Turkey, that can't be good. There has to be a terrible place going to Turkey. And then I would go to Turkey and I'd walk through the streets of Istanbul and I'd go to the different tourism attractions around the country. And there's loads of them. And then I'd come back and she'd be like, how was Turkey? Turkey, that couldn't have been good. And so she would be all flipped out. And I would say, I ate baklava. I went to these things. Here's some picture. Here's some people that I met on the street. And I would show her these pictures, and then she'd be on the phone, and I'd hear her go, oh, Devin went to Turkey. He had a fantastic time. I hear it's wonderful. And so what I was able to do in my personal firsthand experience is, like, she can read something in the newspaper and say, oh, okay, this must be a terrible thing. But she doesn't know for sure until somebody like me goes there and says, no, here are the pictures. Here's my experience. And she's going to take my word for it.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to take my word for it. And so that's kind of what In the Know Traveler is about, is bringing your firsthand story of going to some weird place that most people aren't going to go to. And, it's like, there's some people who won't go to Mexico, but once they go to Mexico and go, well, this isn't so bad. Yeah. Maybe I'll go to Guatemala or Belize or Colombia or some other place with a worse reputation.
Right, for sure.
And by the way, I've been to all of those places multiple times. And so, I've gone to Barrio Trece in Medellin and had a great time, and they're doing some great work. Would I want to go there in the middle of the horrendousness? No. But the horrendousness is just a limited space and time.
Yeah.
Because at some point that horrendousness stops and something else takes over. Maybe the horrendousness will return. Right. But you don't not go to Germany because you need to have schnitzel. You know what I mean? Because they had a Holocaust 70 years ago. You embrace the fact that those kinds of things happen and you use reasonable logic in getting around. You don't wear a bunch of really expensive jewelry where somebody's going to want to, who has far less than you, who's going to want to take all your jewelry. Right. But other than that, go see the world.
For sure.
So that's what I propose.
Just leave your jewelry home no matter where you travel.
Right. No, totally. You don't need to do that. Go have the schnitzel and go have the baleadas in Honduras and you go have your experience.
Well, and the thing about the jewelry in all seriousness is that if you're traveling to other places that are nowhere near as wealthy as the West, you don't want to be insulting people by walking in like the ignorant American who just walks in and expects every place in the world to be like places in America. And it's really disrespectful of where you're going, of the culture, of the people and everything else. And in my opinion, whenever you're traveling to a place, it's really important to really explore what that place has to offer. Because then you really get a sense of where you are and the people who live there and that they're not all that different from you.
Yeah. This is, honestly, it's an opportunity to represent us to the world, because a lot of people, just as we only hear bad news from Mexico, they hear our nonsense.
Yeah, for sure.
But that said, most people around the world realize that our politics are not our people. Which is a good thing.
For sure. That's such a good thing.
Most of the time when I travel, there is somebody who is, they're curious most of the time. They'll want to engage in politics, but not so much to fight with me about politics, but because they don't understand it, because they hear that our healthcare costs are way higher and more expensive. And they are by comparison to the rest of the world, even third world countries. This is true. And so, we're a curiosity. We're sort of like that looming thing. And so this is an opportunity to know people because they want to know you. Right. They want to know you. They want to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely.
I've made some great friends around the world because of their curiosity about the United States.
Absolutely. Me too, for sure. As we're coming to near the end of our conversation, Devin.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's so shocking. It's unbelievable. Like, wait a minute, how did that happen? But I wanted to ask you, okay, so you've got the travel writing, of course, that is, the mainstay of your writing today. And you've written the book, which is clearly something very different from the day-to-day writing that you're doing in the Know Traveler. When you were writing the book, was there a level of satisfaction or gratification that you got from being able to write that type of a story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think what happens is that you have to delve in when you write memoir, you have to tell the truth. Otherwise, who cares?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's irrelevant. So that means you have to go, like my first thoughts all had to be deleted at some point. Because the obvious stuff, I have issues with my father. Who cares?
Who doesn't?
Know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. Everybody has issues with their family about some
Yeah.
sort of nonsense. That's just kind of what it is. So what that means was I had to sort of like acknowledge these first level experiences, and then I had to kind of write about them in a deeper way. And sometimes it was humorous, and sometimes it was sad, and sometimes I had to kind of acknowledge my own sort of like imperfections and judgments and understanding and selfishness and entitledness of, there was a point when I was writing the book where it was like I was realizing that I had all of these expectations of what other people were supposed to be giving to me. And it dawned on me that I wasn't really even aware that I wasn't necessarily bringing anything to the party. And it was a big kind of realization. I was like a grown-up person. And I realized that these were the kinds of thoughts that I was having. I mean, they were real, and I wrote about them. And I also wrote the fact that it was like, yeah, I can be a selfish jerk. I was at a place in my life where these kinds of thoughts and feelings were acceptable, and I tried to explain it as best I could and just be this, imperfect human being. And you keep writing, and you keep writing. And so at the end of the day, it was like when I put quite literally the last period, I felt really good. Whether or not the book would sell ever, like it doesn't matter. I knew that I had told the truth in a way that I believe would be universal to a lot of people, and I think that would be useful. And of course, if you just want to read it because it's dark and weird and funny, and it's about con men and some really kind of low-level society kinds of things, you can do that too.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping it's one of those things you walk a very fine line. Because because I'm presenting my father as being a bit of a ne'er-do-well and a great guy. And I think it's a tricky place to walk, where you can like, okay, we're acknowledging his imperfections and saying, well, but he's a good guy too. He's still, he's still human. Like the last thing I wanted to do was write a book that would point out all of his frailties, just so he could be hated. Yeah. And I don't think that happened. I think I walked that narrow line, and I think, I'm happy. I'm happy that, I think I told a full picture of my relationship with him.
Oh, that's beautiful. And of course, having the two sides of him makes for a much richer story about a person that you're writing about, because it also enables you to draw on so many more emotions that you have and more of your truth around your relationship to both sides of him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. And now that the book is going to be published and in stores on September 18th of 2018, what have your thoughts been about, what your next move is with respect to your writing? Are you already working on something else, or are you waiting for the book to be published to see where it takes you?
Well, I mean, truthfully, writers write. So,
yes, they do.
So that's what we do. So, I mean, after I finish the book, I have written numerous travel articles that are all over the internet. And yeah, there's a mom book, and mom is still with us. So that is kind of moving. I'm probably 40,000 words into that. And my wife and I are in the process of getting married 100 times in 100 countries. So far, we have been married 20 times in 15 countries. And because of my travel, sort of know-how. I mean, quite literally, we've had, castle weddings and weddings. We had a Latin Vulgari wedding in a castle in San Marino, where I was knighted as a Cavaliere di San Marino. And we've been married. I mean, we've been married in castles surrounded by moats and on islands. And,
oh my God.
A Mayan recreated wedding and a Balinese Hindi wedding. And I mean, we've done some amazing things. So, so I am probably about 20,000 words. In other words, a fair bit of writing on that book as well.
Wow. So 20,000 words for 20 weddings. You're looking at 100,000 word book by the time you get done with all those weddings, huh?
Well, no. I mean, actually, the 20 weddings book, I'm probably going to start at about 80,000 words, and then it'll be cut down to whatever it's cut down to. Again, it's all a process. You kind of throw it all out there, and then you decide, is this really the book that needs to be written? Because there's a book that I like, when I wrote my father's book, I wrote that for me, right? But then when you start cutting it and rearranging it and doing what's necessary, so you will be reading it. Like, because at some point, yes, I wrote for me, but the story as it continues has to be for the reader.
Right.
That's the deal, right? I have to make sure that I'm giving you something of value. Otherwise, why turn the page?
Yeah, for sure. That's beautiful. Oh my God. This is, I have many other questions for you, Devin, because having interviewed your wife, and she talked quite a bit about you. I have a lot of questions.
I'm a lucky guy.
Holy cow. And the way she was talking about you, oh my God, it's just like such a fairy tale romance and continues to be on into your marriage. And so perhaps, and as I said this to her, perhaps I can have the two of you come back together on an episode so that we can just talk about the whole matter of love.
Honestly, anytime you are a dreamboat, I think you have such a great energy about you. That was one of the things that I noticed. And I loved your pitch as well. And yeah, any time at all. Let's talk about, I mean, here's the thing, like when you're talking about my wife, I have to blush a little bit. Like I lead a life I don't believe that I quite deserve. But that doesn't mean I'm going to change anything. That just means I'm going to try to honor those I love by leading a good life and keep, exploring who it is that I am. And, hopefully uncover some more good stuff and embrace, the imperfections and, try to be the best Devon that I'm capable of being.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Well, you're doing a great job from what I can tell.
Thank you, Arlene.
Well, thank you so very much, Devin. This has been so delightful. I cannot wait until the book comes out. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with the book and with you once it does come out. It's going to be an exciting journey once the book is released. So I wish you all the best with it. And I hope you'll come back after it's been published so we can talk about it.
I would love to. Is it okay if I mention a link?
Yes, I was about to ask you that. That's the last thing I ask.
Oh, well, thank you so much. If you go to devingallaudet.com/dad, then you'll get sort of like, you'll get actually what my original query letter was, the thing that sold the book. So hopefully that will be inspiring. And it gives links to places like IndieBound and Powell's and Barnes & Noble, as well as Amazon. So yes, you can pre-order it and learn a little bit more about the book. And by the way, if you join that site, then, or my site, I'm also giving away free books from other publishers just because I'm a book nerd at heart.
Oh, how wonderful. What a treat. And you can find Devin at his website at Devin, Devin, Galaudet, GALAUDET.com. And as we wrap this up, Devin, let me just ask you one final question. For a lot of people who listen to the show, they may find themselves at different points in their life where they're struggling with something in their life. They have a real challenge, or they're experiencing something that is just creating huge roadblocks for them, and they're struggling with what their next move is. And if you had any thoughts that you might share with them about how you get yourself moving and to a point where you can decide what your next move is, what would your thoughts be on that, and what would you share with them?
First off, this falls into the no man is an island, no woman is an island. I don't believe for a second that we do this on our own. I wrote my book because I started a writer's group in my living room, and I was beholden to people who were showing up in my living room every Thursday at 7:30. I honestly believe that part of the reason we have to go through the trials and tribulations that we do is so that others can rise to the occasion to help us. Now, nobody gets to do that if I lock myself in my room and I just deal with it on my own and try to pull myself up by the bootstraps always. I mean, I think there are times where it's like, okay, I just have to get up and make my bed and put on my big boy pants and go and face the world. Part of that facing of the world is, wow, this is out of my league. I need somebody else's expertise.
Right.
You know what I mean? If I break a leg, I am not going to set it myself.
I should think not.
Yeah, they have human beings who know how to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So let them. And so that also means that if I am feeling stuck, if I'm feeling depressed, if I'm feeling alone, then it's really hard, but I have to pick up the phone. And I have to let the people who love and care for me, I have to give them the opportunity to actually love and care for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that, and sometimes that means even asking a stranger for help or somebody I don't know really well. There have been times where I have absolutely stopped what I'm doing so I can just talk to somebody who looks like they're having a rotten day. Mm-hmm. And I don't know them and I'll never see them again. And I'm not doing it for brownie points. Yeah. I'm doing it because for the most selfish reason in the world. I'm doing it because when I'm in that place, that somebody will stop for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's nothing like, being in a situation where you're really struggling and just turn your attention away to someone else that you can give a gift to. It's amazing how you get it back tenfold.
Oh, absolutely. And it's amazing that when you actually spend your time helping other people, mm-hmm. not listening to your own nonsense.
Yeah, for sure.
You know
Absolutely
what I mean?
True. Mm-hmm.
Like Arlene, like if you ever have a place where, the shit hits the fan mm-hmm. and you can't think of anybody else to call, then call me.
I absolutely will.
You know what I mean? Like, let's break it all down. I'll tell you about my troubles.
We'll do a podcast that day.
Right. And we won't think about your troubles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We'll discuss my troubles.
Yeah.
And together we get through this stuff. Yeah. I mean, I really believe that. I mean, maybe that sounds a little woo-woo or a little something, but I think,
you know what it sounds like? It just sounds like the intimacy of relationships, which is what we all want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we just need each other. I honestly believe I wouldn't even be alive if I didn't have a really great support system of human beings who've stepped up and helped me every step of the way.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Devin. This has been so lovely and such a wonderful way to spend the last hour. I thank you so very much for everything that you've shared today. It's been just delightful. And I hope you'll come back after the book is published.
Oh, it would be my honor. This has been a fun time, Arlene. I'm really grateful.
Beautiful. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I sure have myself. All right. That is it for today. And as I always wrap up every episode, I ask you to look at where you're at in your life and ask yourself, what's your next move? I'm Arlene Battishill, and I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battishill, and I want to know, what's your next move?